Hey, what's up? Hello, I hope you all are doing well. Welcome back to our channel. It is finally the final quarter of 2022. We also happen to be in the spookiest and coziest of seasons, so I'm excited to talk about all of my summer books on this very chilly day. And it turns out that over the summer, I had more time than I anticipated to read. I also read a number of books on my phone, which is not something that I enjoy doing nor have ever done. And they were very big books as well, so we'll talk about that. But all in all, 11 books in quarter three. Pretty proud of myself, you know? So in April, I read Shadow and Bone, talked about it a little bit here, and then I watched the show this summer, which really inspired me to finish reading the series, the first trilogy series by Leigh Bardugo. So in the beginning of the summer, I read Siege and Storm and Ruin and Rising, both of which I read on my phone because I had lent all of the copies that I have out to a friend to take to the beach. So didn't have them in time for when I wanted to read them. Read them both on my phone. They were fine, in the same way that the first book was fine. I think I probably enjoyed Ruin and Rising the most. It had the most sort of political aspect to it. I wasn't thrilled with the ending. I guess I can't really see any other way for that series to have ended, but regardless, they were both fine. I feel the same way about these last two books and about the whole series as I do Shadow and Bone. It works as a setup to the world that's getting built, and that's fine. That's all it needs to be. It gives us a context for the better of the two in this universe, the Grishaverse, which are Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. Everyone that I've spoken to that's read the Shadow and Bone series insists that these are better, and I agree, they were. I much preferred the cabal of folks running around in these stories to the initial trilogy. I thought Six of Crows was particularly good. I thought by the time I got to Crooked Kingdom, it was just like we were now inventing problems. 2/3 of the way through the book, I was like, all right, fine. I get it. This is a good continuation. And then the final third, it was just, there were too many problems, too much intricacy. I appreciated the detail and the intricacy of the plot and like the craft of the deception that was woven, but it just felt a little too far. So these were a nice duology. I only just got these books back the other day. They're full of sand because my friend took them to the beach. Yeah, definitely would rate them higher than I rated the trilogy. The writing is the writing. It's like YA-ish, young adult-ish, early adult, whatever that other category is. New adult fantasy writing. It's good. I appreciated this story more. And I read Six of Crows on my phone, which is very, very small, and I'm quite proud of myself because it wasn't going to come in any other format from the library in time for me to read it as a real book. And like I said, I just got this back this week. So very proud of myself for making it through this rather thick book in a digital format, which is not my preferred way to read at all. I'm specifically not saying a ton about these books, only because there are folks out there who have done much better reviews of these, who are much more inclined toward these stories, and can give you a much more detailed insight into if this is something that you want to pick up. I would much rather that you went to go look at Jenny's reviews instead. But yeah, I would say B+, A-, and a B, I guess, for this. If I had to do it again, maybe I would have just started here and then read Shadow and Bone for the backstory of like what they were all talking about with Alina, but I am glad also that I read them in the right, air quotes, order. I'm so behind the popularity of these books that I learned that there were two more. There is a whole other duology that follows all of this, but King of Scars was the next one. I read that book. I enjoyed that book. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I wanted to based on the two characters that are featured in those. Like the two folks that those books focus on were two of the more interesting characters in the Shadow and Bone trilogy to me, and I wanted to get more of their story, but in the end, that book sort of just centered vaguely around themes of redemption for them and figuring out who they are and ridding themselves of demons, literally and figuratively. And I thought it was fine. I think I was looking for and expecting for more out of that and just didn't get it, which is why by the time I got to Rule of Wolves, I like DNF'd this book at page 100 because I was just no longer interested. I just didn't have the drive to get through another 600 to 700 pages of something that was like, eh. And at some point I'll probably go back and finish this because it irks me to have in the back of my mind a book that big and a series this robust unfinished. So eventually I will come back to that. It's just not on my list for right now. So I read all of those books in July and August, and intermixed with that were some books that I read for book club, the first of which is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a very popular book that came out in 2021. This follows the story of the Riva family who are throwing a major party, and they're all professional surfers. It's a whole big thing. They're super famous, and by the end of the night, their annual party leaves their beach house completely in flames. I did a review of this book, a full review of this book earlier this summer, which you can check out if you want, somewhere up there. We read this for book club. It was breezy and nice, and a nice foray back into the Taylor Jenkins Reid world, where she interweaves all of her characters from her other books somehow, some way, into her latest stories. We get introduced to Carrie Soto in this book, who just has her own coming out now. Taylor Jenkins Reid's newest book is called Carrie Soto is Back, and it's all about this woman who is a tennis player who is involved with these characters toward the end of the story. So looking forward to picking that up. This was good. I enjoyed this book. I don't know that I enjoyed it as much as I liked The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but I would recommend this very much as a sort of fun summary read. I definitely didn't like it as much as Daisy Jones and the Six, but it had similar vibes to it, I suppose. Just in terms of the way that the story was constructed and the narrative around people who are actively doing the wrong thing and know that they're doing the wrong thing, but continue to choose that anyway. At some point, I then read The Cartographers by Peng Shepherd. I did a review about this book too. I had a lot of things to say. I had a lot of reactions to other people's reactions, so I cannot begin to get into it here, but you're welcome to watch that if you want. This book, which is about librarians and takes place in the New York Public Library and beyond, is a magical realism book. Through reading this, I discovered once again, somehow I have to keep discovering this, that I don't like magical realism, and the story didn't quite get there for me. I liked this. It had a lot of good qualities. I was dissuaded by the magical realism in it and kept trying to figure out the physics around that part of it, and it didn't work out for me. But I did think that the cast of characters in this book was great. I would have wanted to hear more about them, and I'm so interested in folks' opinions on this book because it seems to be widely derided across the internet. And then for people who are not like super into books, they seem to really enjoy it. So I'm fascinated with people's opinions of this book. I am, however, not fascinated with people that don't understand or refuse to understand the terminology of identity and professional life. But that's like I said, a different video. In August for book club, we read The Lost Girls of Camp Forevermore by Kim Fu. Pretty much everyone in book club didn't like this book. This story follows 5 girls who go to sleepaway camp up in the Pacific Northwest, and their ages like 9 to 11, or maybe 9 to 12, and the woman who is leading their kayaking trip is one of the older women who is a camp counselor, and like her whole life has been about camp. She's super devoted to this camp, and she leads them to a part of an island that they kayak to that is completely not where they're meant to be because she wants to give them an adventure, and they wind up getting stranded out there. And so this book is a little bit about their adventure, trying to survive that experience, and predominantly about how that experience affected them later on in their lives. And so each girl kind of has a chapter where she reflects on her life and how her life has gone, and sometimes it makes mention of that incident at camp, but not always. As a reader, we're meant to infer how that experience shaped them. A lot of folks in my library book club were hoping that those connections would be more apparent and more stark, and we would clearly see how this thing at camp changed the course of these girls' lives. It was a lot more vague. This book really would have worked well as a television show, like a short 8-episode television series. I don't think you get anything additional from internal monologue or internal thought from the characters that you can get in text that you can't get in like a third person perspective television show. This book was okay. I was anticipating liking it more. I disagreed with most of the folks in my group. I thought there was plenty to infer about the girls' trip and how it impacted the rest of their lives through adulthood, and whether or not they ever meet up with each other again after that sort of fateful experience. They wanted more, and I felt that there was enough there to make inferences from, but the group was hoping for it to be a little bit more clear-cut. In September, we read The 5 Wounds for book club. This is an excellent book about a young woman who is 16 and pregnant, and she arrives at her father and grandmother's house in New Mexico, in a part of New Mexico that is just very poor, notoriously full of Latinx people who are using heroin. That's the impression immediately that you get, is that this is an underserved community and a predominantly non-white community. She talks very much about all of the people who live there and what it's like to be from this town. And this is the story of the first year of her baby's life, living with her grandmother and her father and repairing her relationship with her mother and learning who she is. This is a very deeply emotional book, very strong, well-written characters who go on various different personal journeys that intertwine with each other. It's a very character-driven book. There is a plot. This is not one of those books where, nothing really happens throughout the course of the plot, although some folks in our group suggested that was the case. This really was about looking at people closely, watching their development, and the everyday humdrumness that happens over time of just like, I got up and I did this and I put my baby to sleep and I made dinner, and the toll that even those regular routine tasks take when you are part of a dysfunctional family who is existing in a society that constantly belittles them. It's a really powerful book. It's a very intense book, and I would certainly recommend it. This is one of the longer books we've read for book club this year, and it's certainly worth the read. I would also suggest that if you are not a native Spanish speaker, you would be greatly impacted by listening to the audio, which I did. I supplemented the print text with the audio, and for someone who does not speak Spanish regularly, it was very nice to have things pronounced the way that they are meant to be heard. On a very different note, around that time I was also reading Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood, which is a cute contemporary romance. It's the second book in Ali Hazelwood's STEMinists series about feminist women in STEM, and this very much felt like a brushed up, bettered version of her first book, The Love Hypothesis. It was almost a carbon copy with the names changed and a little bit different detail, but in the end I felt that this book was stronger, even though it was similar enough. I preferred the characters in this book in a way, and I preferred the challenges that they went through, although there were some very frustrating quirks for the sake of being quirky that kept happening in this book, which I didn't appreciate. Like, we all get it. You're a vegan. We don't need you to remind us about the perils of being a vegan on every page, and you have colorful hair, and you have tattoos, and you have piercings, and all right, cool. Those can all be things that exist as part of your identity, but I felt the author harped on them as particular quirks a couple too many dozen times. Because there's a way to mention those things as facets of identity that either benefit or hinder you in a professional world, which she touches on all of those, and then there's a way to do it that is just sort of pedantic for the reader, and we got both of those in this book. So as much as I think this is a polished version of her previous book with different characters and a slightly different plot, that did irk me about it. But if you're looking for a comprehensive review of that book, I think you would be much, much better served by watching Jess Owen's review, which I'll link down below. Hers is great, and it comes from her who did not like the love hypothesis. So if you're on the fence about reading this book, I would definitely watch that video. And then lastly in this quarter, I read another contemporary spooky season romance called Payback's a Witch. And this is about a girl named Demi who is, living her best life, working away, has carved out a place for herself in Chicago, and has to go home to a tiny town called Thistle Grove, that's what it is. Presumably somewhere in rural Illinois. It's not ever quite said where Thistle Grove is. I was definitely anticipating it would be on the East Coast, but that's not the case since it's super near Chicago. So she's going home to Thistle Grove because she is a witch. She comes from a family, one of 4 families who founded this town, and all of them have witch powers. Witches used no matter what gender identity the person uses. So there's 4 major families of witches in town, and she has to go home because there's this big contest type of thing that's happening, and her family have sort of been like Hufflepuffed into being the record keepers. They're like the boring ones. They don't take place in challenges. They don't compete. They are there, and she is the arbiter of this and the documentarian. And she has to go and arbitrate the entire competition while the other 3 families compete. And so this is a situation where this style of witch, if you are away from the place where you draw your magic from, the magic is location based. And if you're away from it for a long enough time, you start to lose your power. And so she feels her power flooding back to her as she approaches and has to confront her past. There's the past of the lover who spurned her in high school who still is there and just, running around being a general asshole. His family has a capitalist bent and is trying to commodify this town into general, orange and black Hallmark spooky season-esque type of thing. She has to confront whether or not she wants to stay away from home because she doesn't have power away from home, but she's also built a life for herself, and she's away from her family. She hasn't been back in a long time, and she meets, or re-meets rather, this woman who she went to high school with named Talia, who is from another one of the witch families, and they have an instant little connection, and once that connection starts to blossom, she needs to decide whether or not that is important enough, and her lineage and her history and the importance of the town and what her place is in it means enough to her to stay. I will say this is a very drawn out book. It's not exceptionally long, but the emotionality and the sorting through this is so drawn out across the book. And my biggest issue with this is an issue I have all the time, which is where people are consistently addressing each other by name in the book. And I totally wrote about this in one of my Goodreads updates. We do not need to say each other's names every 3 sentences in dialogue. I get that part of it was a cute little transition from oh, I'm only going to call you by your last name to now I feel comfortable enough to call you by your first name. But once we've established that is a thing that's happening in the dialogue, the rest of it I can't handle. I can't. You can't call someone their name that frequently in conversation because it's very unrealistic. There are 2 people in the room. There's absolutely no one else that you could be addressing. We all know who you're talking to. Put me over the edge. So this was cute. I don't think this is one of the best contemporary romances I've ever read. Definitely has its problems, the name thing being one of them. But if you're looking for a short little spooky season book to read, then this would be one for you. I've heard it compared to the X-Hex, which I haven't read, and every time I read the description for that book, something tells me that one's not going to be for me. I don't know why. I can't remember just pinpointing why I don't want to read that book, so maybe I should look at it again and decide for a 16th time, but we'll see. Lo and behold, in the end, that was 11 books in this quarter. I'm right in the middle of The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, which is a book that we are reading for a book club for October, and it is about an Indigenous woman who works at a primarily Indigenous bookstore, and they are being haunted by one of their former customers. The cool thing about this book is it's the first book that I've read that actually confronts the pandemic. So it takes place between November of 2019 all the way through November of 2020. And I haven't seen or read a book that is fiction that incorporates the pandemic and the realities of that, and the realities of the fact that, you know, we're still in it even today. So it's been interesting to see that and revisit that fear from a removed, an enlightened perspective. And I hope we'll kind of see more of that in fiction as time goes on, because if you're going to write for contemporaneity, you got to work it in somehow. I welcome your thoughts on these books. I'm sure there will be fewer books in Q4, just the way that the fall is always busy, and then we get into the festive season at the end, and that takes up some time. But if you've got thoughts on any of these books, I welcome your comments below. I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you very soon.